Hi, my name is Timothy Johnson, and today I am preaching my second sermon for Homiletics 2 for Professor Hemphill. The title of this sermon is Striving to be Great or Avoiding Failure. So I want to start off by saying one of the things that I've kind of learned this past year about myself is that I am an overachiever. Let me start by saying I took the Enneagram a little while ago, and it was really fascinating to me. This Enneagram thing, it doesn't really, it's different than like Myers-Briggs or the Strengths Finder. Like, so Strengths Finder tells you, what you're good at, what you're strong at. Myers-Briggs kind of tells you your overall personality as far as, people and jobs and life tends to be. The Enneagram is different because it tells you about your overall personality just in general. And what's really interesting about it is when you're reading it, it basically describes who you are. But even more interesting about it is it says that the person that you are, this personality, it doesn't really define you. It's just what you've lived yourself as for most of your life. And there's another you beneath that surface and beneath that personality. And so when I took the Enneagram, I came out to be a type 3. And type 3s are called achievers. And I was looking at the description of achiever and read, and it was totally compared to me. But what was more interesting about the achiever thing is the overall description of what they said we do. And it says that when you are an achiever, you wear a mask to be whatever someone needs you to be successful. So I can walk into any place in the world and put on a mask, and I can create myself to be a successful human being in that environment. It's just that simple for me. But the thing is, we wear so many masks that we tend to forget, or we begin to forget who we really are, or even scarier, some of us never actually figure that out. So I was like, okay, I feel like this is more so describing me. And so this took me on a whole journey of trying to figure out why am I such an achiever? Why am I trying to win? And so one of the first things I had to tell I came to was, hey, I'm an overachiever. I'm constantly trying to win at everything that I do. But I had to question why I was doing that. See, because even though I am an achiever and I like to win, winning wasn't my full motive for throwing myself into everything full-fledged and trying to be this and trying to be that and wearing all these masks and trying to be things for other people. See, I began to ask myself the question, did I simply want to win? Or was I trying to avoid failure? And that's an interesting point. That's an interesting thought. Because there are people who are driven to win. You think about these amazing athletes, like a Tom Brady or LeBron James, who works incredibly hard to get things done and has won numerous championships. But they work incredibly hard to win the game and to lead their team to victory. However, I began to realize that I wasn't really being driven by achieving. I wasn't even really being driven by winning. I enjoyed winning. It felt good to me, but I wasn't really being driven by winning. I was being driven by trying to avoid failure. I realized the sting of failing affects me more than the excitement of winning, and I could not figure out why. It baffled me. See, because I figured if I really, really loved winning, then no matter what instance of life, I could always try to pursue a win. But I began to realize when I wasn't given an objective, when someone when someone didn't put a goal in front of me and there was nothing to achieve or win, I just shut down and did anything. I just shut down and did nothing. And I realized that I'm just going through life trying to avoid failure. And I'm like, that's not healthy. So I began to talk with the Lord and be like, okay, and ask him the question, why am I like this? Why am I so, how can I put it, why am I so trying to push to avoid failure? Like, why am I trying to run from that? And here's the conclusion that I came up with. Failure makes me feel inadequate, less than, and unworthy. That's the root of my issue, and that's what Jesus wants to deal with. See, you have this Bible, and you have this Jesus who says, hey, you are more than a conqueror, you are loved, you are a child of God. But in my mind, failure makes me feel less than that. And so it's almost as if I put more value in the failure than I do in what Jesus says about me. And so I was like, ooh, that's not good. I can't live that way. I can't live my life trying to avoid failure, because failure is how we learn things. So I was like, okay, God, so where do I need to go? Where in your word do I need to go to help deal with this issue? And so as I looked into the word, God took me to 2 Corinthians 12:7-10. And here's what it says. So you got Paul, he's writing the second letter to the Corinthian church. The first letter was a big reprimand. He's been, he got onto them about about some of their sexual misconduct, some of the things that they said about him, that kind of deal. They were a church, and they were living for God, but they also had some very, very bad practices that Paul was trying to deal with. Well, in the second Corinthian letter, it's not the case. It's more of a letter of exhortation. He's saying, hey, you guys did really, really well. You obeyed everything I said. But there was this issue of people were arguing and debating over whether he was truly an apostle. Or even better yet, just how good of a minister Paul really was. And so Paul spends a lot of this letter explaining his credentials of being an apostle. But there's just one little part that's really interesting where he really gets in a humble stance, and he tries to take the attention away from him. And he says, so starting in verse 7, he says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. It's a beautiful verse. It's widely it's debated in many circles, because many people are trying to debate what that messenger of Satan is, or they're trying to debate what the thorn in Paul's flesh was. But to kind of give you some context of what just happened. So Paul just had been given a vision of heaven. He's just seen amazing things. God is just giving him incredible insight to what the kingdom of heaven is like. And a lot of that insight comes out in many of the letters that Paul writes to the churches. However, God didn't want him to think that, he had it all together, that everything was everything. So what he did is he allowed Paul to have a weakness. And it's kind of weird, because when you're growing up, it's kind of like, you know how they have the thing where they talk about adulting. They talk about, I want to adult. Well, if you look at the real root of what adulting means, it means growing more independent. So everything we do in our lives is so that we can grow more and more independent for ourselves. The kingdom is the exact opposite. We're supposed to grow more and more dependent on God. And so in this scripture, it's almost like saying that God will allow us to have weaknesses to keep us from becoming prideful and independent. And I was like, that's really interesting, because I feel like every day I'm trying to grow and get better and get away from my weaknesses. And the Lord is like, no, I want to use your weaknesses. Now, I'm not talking about allowing sin to stay in your life. That's different. So if you have an addiction, if you have an issue with lying or something like that, that's different. When I'm talking weaknesses, I'm talking more limitations. You're not supposed to be without limitations. You are human. You're not God, you're human. God knew you were human, that you were born with limits. There's one scripture that says God knows that we are merely dust. So you admit that you were meant to be born with limitations, but in those limitations, you would need God's help and his power to do things. And so therefore you would get closer to him. So limitations are okay. We can't avoid them. We can't run from them. We can't try to push them away. That's not healthy either. But then if you go down to verse 9, one of my favorite, verse 8 and 9, one of my favorite parts of the scripture, and then Paul says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord. Now, what's interesting about this, thorn in the side is we don't know if it was a person, we don't know if it was a disease, we don't know what the thing was that was plaguing him, but it really bugged him. Have you ever had something in your life where you were just like, God, take this away? Like, I am so tired of struggling with this addiction. I am so tired of struggling with this person. I am so tired of my family situation. I am so tired of not being financially stable. And you're like, God, just take this away. Just make it happen. And it didn't happen. But this is the situation that Paul is in. And so Paul's saying, hey, take this away, take this away. If you just take it away, I promise I can be such a better minister. If you just take this away, I'll be such a better Christian. And look at Jesus' response. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And he's saying, hey, he's like, I know you feel that you can be so much better without this weakness, without this limitation. But if you allowed me to work through this limitation, if you allowed me to work through this weakness, you would see so much more of my power. Because I don't want to take this limitation from you, and then you all of a sudden believe that you can do this life on your own. No, I want to do it with you. So I'm going to allow this limitation to be there so that you can see me work through. And then he goes on to say, and then Paul, who now realizes, he's like, wow, okay, I get it now. And he says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. That's such a profound statement. He's saying that if I'm content in my weaknesses, if I allow myself to have limits, then those are the areas that God can work through me best. Those are if I'm already strong in an area, it's gonna be really hard for God to come in there. Like if I'm a worship leader and I can really sing well, it's gonna be really hard for God to enter my life in the realm of singing. However, if I'm not all that emotionally healthy, that's a perfect way for God to enter my life and for us to feel closer. And in us growing closer to that area of emotional health, I'll trust him enough to let him into my life in the areas of singing where I'm already strong. Such a profound revelation from Paul. So, to close, what does God want us to know? And I think there's three distinct things from this passage that God wants us to know. And number one, being Christ-like doesn't mean avoiding weaknesses. It doesn't. Being Christ-like, God doesn't want perfection. He wants us. In Genesis, when God created humanity, he created it imperfect. Our spirits are perfect, but our physical and emotional bodies were not. And he still called us very good. And even after the fall, God didn't revoke what his claim and said humanity is no longer very good. God's word still stands today, yesterday, today, and forever. And in that word, he said humanity is very good. So he created something with limitations, and then he said that it was very good. So if he knew that you were very good if he knew that you were very good with your limitations, he's not going to renege on that. Being Christ-like, being Christ-like is not setting this unreachable standard. Being Christ-like just means we're growing in righteousness, we're growing in joy, we're growing in peace, we're growing in the fruits of the Spirit. And nowhere on that list of the fruits of the Spirit does it say that perfection's on that list. We shoot for excellence, but not perfection. Because when we're trying to be perfect, it means that we're trying to have it all we're trying to have it all put together. And when you're trying to shoot for perfection, you can't be vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable, you can't have intimacy. And that excludes you from being able to have real relationships with people and with God. So being Christ-like, this does not mean avoiding weaknesses. Number two, whatever my failures are, God can govern them. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a free pass to just go on and sin. Not saying that. What it does, however, mean